Dear Oliver colleagues, let me try and shift some things around. Okay. Yeah, welcome, dear colleagues at Eliver. This is my second training, Module 2, relating to Horizon Europe project lifecycle. So during the first module, I gave an overview about the main phases in European project management. I did it at a relatively high level, abstract level. Now with module 2, I want to go back to the first two phases that I spoke about, so the initiation phase and planning phase, and really go, I'm afraid, rather do a deep dive, go into detail about what it means with these different phases in relation to Horizon Europe, specifically the Horizon Europe program and proposals. So this is the agenda. So there's two main parts: initiation phase and then planning phase. With regards to initiation phase, so I'll be talking about how to register to the EU funding and tenders portal, how to identify Horizon Europe calls for proposals, some words about understanding call conditions, how to go about investigating existing related Horizon Europe projects, developing a project charter aligned with EU priorities. I mean, I'll go through that very quickly because we talked a lot about it last time. And then some words about building a consortium. In the planning phase, which in essence is really about writing these Horizon Europe proposals. So for that, I'm going to start off by talking about the standard application forms. Then, because in these, when you apply and you write a proposal, the main part, the technical part, is called the Part B. I'm going to talk about the Part B and the different sections that exist. So there's a Section 1, Scientific Excellence, Section 2, Impact, Section 3, Implementation. After that, I'll talk about resource allocation in these proposals, so about person months and about budgets and costs. I'll move on to talk about the practicalities of submitting a proposal through the European Commission's online funding and tenders portal system. I'll say some words about proposal evaluation. Then if you're one of the people who's fortunate enough to write a successful proposal, you get invited to prepare a grant agreement, the contract negotiations. So I'll say some words about that. And also in link to that, you have what's called a consortium agreement. I'll say some words about that. Okay, so let's get moving on to the initiation phase. Now, I'm sure many of you are already registered to this thing called the EU Funding and Tenders Portal. To remind you, the EU Funding and Tenders Portal, this is the main website where you can find out about Horizon Europe and many other different EU funding schemes. If you're not already registered, this is the website to go to. The QR code will take you there directly. Once you arrive on this website, in the top right-hand corner, you see circled in yellow, it says sign in. Click on there, and that will take you to where you need to register an email address and create a password. If you're going to be involved in any Horizon Europe proposals, you need to be registered on this portal. Another reason why you might want to register here is if this interests you, you can register to be an evaluator for these Horizon Europe proposals. If that's something interesting to you, register yourself on the portal, and then you'll see in on this screenshot, there's a menu at the top. In the middle, it says work as an expert. I suggest you go and investigate there if being an evaluator is something that could be interesting for you. So this figure you will have seen already in Module 1. This is a high-level view about the Horizon Europe program. It's structured into these pillars, Pillar 1, Pillar 2, Pillar 3. And then at the bottom, you have this running horizontally, this sub-program widening, which is especially interesting for a country like Georgia. And indeed, the ASCLEPIUS project is funded through the widening part. Now, if you're interested in any calls for proposals in Horizon Europe, and it's written here in rather difficult to read text in yellow, it says, make sure to download the latest Horizon Europe work programs for the area you are interested in. So for example, the latest widening participation and spreading excellence work program. Now, where can you get these work programs? So these two screenshots, there's one on the left and one on the right. These are the web pages. The QR code in the middle will take you directly to the one on the left. So as you can see from the screenshot, one on the left, it mentions Horizon Europe work programs, assuming you land on that website. Go to the menu in the left where it says view available work programs. If you click on that, that will take you to the website, the screen that you see on the right. And there you'll be required to sort of scroll down and identify which particular work program, whether it's cluster 1, cluster 2, Murray Skłodowska-Curie actions, whatever. This is where you get the official work program. So let's imagine, for argument's sake, we were interested in Murray Skłodowska-Curie actions. This screenshot on the right, this shows you part of the cover of that work program. If you're interested in that work program and maybe particular calls, because these documents are so large, they often have hundreds of pages. Somehow you need to be able to scan and filter through to identify relatively quickly the calls you're interested in. One approach would be to look at the table of contents in the work program in the first few pages. There it shows the titles for the different calls. Alternatively, because these work programs are PDF files, you can do a keyword search. And that may be a way to help you identify rapidly the calls. Assuming you find a call or calls of interest, and this is where I'm reading bullet points on the left, check the conditions for the call. This is a title of a section for a call. So in particular, check what it says about the call deadline. Obviously, the deadline's passed and it's too late. But also in that conditions for the call, you'll see information about budgets, EU contribution per proposal. Also, you'll need, there'll be subsections for each call with headings like expected outcome and scope. And you should look at those. That's some words about downloading work programs and looking there. Another way, through, again, the EU funding and tenders portal. So if you look at this screenshot here, towards the top on the left, you'll see these various pull-down menus. There's one that says funding, highlighted in orange. If you were to click and pull that down, one of the sub-menus that appear will be something like calls for proposals. If you click on that, that will take you to further web pages where you can do quite advanced searches on different EU programs, including Horizon Europe. This QR code on the left of the screen, this will take you directly to this particular page where you can find out about current Horizon Europe calls or forthcoming ones. So this is another way in which you can find out about calls. Maybe you find this is even more effective than using the work programs. Another way you can find out about calls for proposals is through what are called national contact points. So in all the countries that participate in Horizon Europe, including Georgia, not any EU member states, but countries associated to Horizon Europe. Those countries will have experts, officially appointed experts, who know about the different sub-programs. And those experts, they are officially appointed, they are known as national contact points. Now, there'll be national contact points, for example, for widening. Under Pillar 1, the Marais-Skłodowski-Curie actions, there'll be a national contact for that. Pillar 2, the different clusters, you'll have different experts. This screenshot I'm showing you here shows specifically the national contact points for Georgia. The QR code in the top left, that will take you directly there. It's good if you don't already have contact with your national contact points. It's a good thing to develop relations with them. And maybe not only the ones in your own country in Georgia, but maybe in certain EU member states. The reason why I say this is these national contact points sit on program committees of the Horizon Europe. These are committees where the final decisions are taken on whether to adopt work programs. So there's national contact points. They get to see draft work programs. They get to see the final formalized ones. If you do have good links with your national contact points, you can let them know and say, look, oh, I'm interested in, please let me know if there's going to be any calls coming up in the future in the field of phages. And maybe they'll be able to pass on draft work programs to you, so you know even earlier about forthcoming calls. Then another place you can go and look, if you're really, really deeply focused on Horizon Europe, another place you can look, there's a website called Science Business. The QR code on the left will take you there. This is a website that produces sort of daily news about, yes, science, the business of science. And they publish a lot of articles in relation to Horizon Europe. They even have a web page, this is the one that you see here, where they show draft work programs. So this is another place you can go and have a look and try and get, slight edge, slightly advanced knowledge about forthcoming calls. Now, I move on to talk a bit about understanding the conditions for calls for Horizon Europe. Linked with this thing about understanding conditions, it's important to clarify certain acronyms, certain terms that get used. And this is what with this slide here, I want to talk about what are called, you see it in the table on the left, it says, there's a column, it says research and innovation actions, brackets RIA, coordination support actions, CSA, and then in the rows, 2 rows below, it talks about innovation actions, IA. So before I talk any more about the numbers that you see in that table, let's step down to the bullet points at the bottom where I define more clearly what these acronyms stand for. So look, RIA, Research and Innovation Actions. These are collaborative projects that fund research activities upstream of a commercial product or service. In brackets, technology readiness levels, TRLs, 2 to 6. These TRLs, I'll explain what they mean in the following slide. Anyway, these RIAs, they're all about enabling exploration of new technologies, methods, products, or improvement of existing ones. Innovation actions are also collaborative projects funding research activities, but they're closer to a commercial product or service. The TRL levels are typically around 6 to 8. And then CSA, coordination support actions, they're all about improving cooperation to strengthen the European research area. They don't normally directly fund research, it's more activities surrounding research. So it would be things like standardization, dissemination, awareness raising, communication, networking activities, policy dialogues, mutual learning, or studies. ASCLEPIUS project, in fact, is a CSA, an example of a CSA. So these three different types of actions. These actions, for want of a better word, projects, these are the three types that get funded under Horizon Europe. And you'll see in the call text for each different call, it will say whether it's a call for RIA or CSA or IAs. Now, at the same time, it's important to understand what these three terms mean. It's important to understand how the different actions are funded. And here we go back to the table above. So I'm looking at the second row where it says research, innovation, action, coordination, support, action. After that, there's a column where it says direct costs, and it gives an example of 100 euros. So if you're doing a research, innovation, action, or coordination, support, action, any type of costs directly related to that action. So the salary costs for staff working on the project, the travel costs for the involved scientists to go to consortium meetings, the research consumable costs, perhaps for providing phages or chemicals or whatever. These are all direct costs. If you're a scientific organization, a university or public research organization, you don't only have scientists, you don't only have to worry about the costs of scientists working on projects. You also need to think about the overheads that your organization has. So overheads would be things like the buildings where you're working. There'll be heating, electricity, water. Maybe buildings are being rented. You'll also have, say, administrative staff helping to run the organization. These are examples of overheads. And somehow they also need to be accounted for when you're running projects. Now the Commission recognizes that trying to calculate these overheads and allocating them to projects can be very, very complicated from an accounting perspective. So to simplify things, they say, look, for every 100 euros of direct costs, we're going to give you 25 euros of indirect costs. And by indirect costs, we mean essentially overheads. We're just going to make a very simplified approach to this. We're not going to expect you to account for your overheads. We're just going to go, here you go, here's 25 euros. So for every 100 euros of direct costs, 25 euros indirect costs gives total cost of 125. Now for RIA and CSA, the funding rate is 100%. So if you're indicating 125 euros of total cost, the grant will be for 125 euros. For innovation actions, which is the next row, it mentions here regular rate. Regular rate is the rate applied to essentially private companies, private organizations. So here, the way direct costs and indirect costs are calculated and total costs, it's the same. So, for 100 euros of direct costs, there's 25 euros of indirect costs, giving total costs of 125 euros. However, the funding rate for private companies, innovation actions, is 70%. And this 70% is calculated on the total cost. So 70% of 125, this gives you your 87.50 of grant amount. Then the last row, innovation actions, where it says rate for non-profit organizations. This is the rate for universities and public research organizations. Here, rather like with RIA and CSA, the European Commission say the funding rate is 100%. So for 125 euros of total cost, you'll get 125 of grant. Now you might wonder, why is it just this different funding rates on innovation actions for private companies? The sort of philosophy behind it is these innovation actions, these are projects which are closer to commercialization of a product or service. In other words, they're less risky. It's not such early research. And therefore, there's less of a need to incentivize the companies to get involved in such projects. And consequently, the funding rate is low. And I move on to talk about technology readiness levels. And I mentioned them briefly already in the slide before. This column you see here, these shows you the different TRL levels and the titles for each of those. In essence, it's a way of categorizing what state of development a technology is in, going all the way from research, basic principles at TRL level 1, all the way up to TRL level 9, where it's saying an actual system proven in an operational environment. When you read a bit these titles, these different categorizations, it is somewhat engineering kind of oriented. That's because this TRL system was originally sort of pioneered back in the 60s in the space sector when they were developing rockets and very complicated technology systems. Nevertheless, even today, projects dealing with phages, dealing with healthcare, you will see this usage of TRL levels in Horizon Europe. So the last slide sort of talking about understanding core conditions. And I apologize a bit here. The example I've got here isn't related to bacteriophages. It's something more sort of very physics, quantum physics related, but nevertheless, I still give it as an example. At the top, it's got this strange sort of title, Horizon Europe, sort of Horizon CL4 for Cluster 4, 2023 Digital Emerging -01-50, Next Generation Quantum Sensing and Metrology Technologies. So look, this is the title of a call that appeared in the Cluster 4 work program. So this is a work program under Pillar 2 in Horizon Europe, dealing with IT, space, nanosciences, these different topics. The first part where it said Horizon CL4, etc. This is the specific call identifier. This is the unique thing. If you're doing any calls, whatever the topic, you need to look for the identifier and have that carefully noted. Okay, regardless what topic is, bacteriophages, quantum sensing, there's a specific kind of format to these calls. So if you would open the work program cluster 4, you found this, you'd look for the title specific conditions. There it would say what the expected EU contribution for the project is. In other words, the amount of grants the Commission is expecting to allocate to each project. It would show what the indicative budget is. In other words, the total budget for that call. Obviously, if you know what the contribution per project is and the indicative budget, one divided by the other, you get an idea of how many projects they're expecting to fund. Also in specific conditions, it will tell you the type of action. Is it an RIA, IA, or CSA? There'll be some words about eligibility conditions. Is it a call that's limited to, for example, to EU member states, associated countries, or maybe the call's open to other further internationalization, OECD, Mercosur countries. It all depends. Also, in the specific conditions, it will say about technology readiness levels. So If it's a research and innovation action, it might be saying that we're looking for proposals where during the course of the project, you go from TRL level 2 to TRL level 4, which is innovation action, obviously higher numbers. Also in the call text, there'll be a subsection which says expected outcome. And typically this is several paragraphs of text identifying the expected outcomes the proposal expected to contribute. And then thirdly, there'll be a subsection scope with typically extensive text describing the scope of the call. Now, all this information, specific conditions, expected outcome, scope, usually it's spread over maybe 2 to 3 sides of A4 paper within the work program. And you'll need to print those out. You need to have those readily to hand if you're doing a proposal. Still in this area about initiation phase and getting yourself sort of ready for preparing a proposal. I'd like to say some words about how you can investigate yourselves about existing projects that have been funded under Horizon Europe. And in fact, when I did the module training a month ago, and we had the Q&A, the question and answer session at the end, Elizabeth was asking me some questions, and in fact, what I'm about to show you now, I kind of did this exercise. So as I did a month ago, and I'm showing this slide, I brought up something called the European Commission's Cordis Project Database. So this is a free, publicly accessible database where you can find out about the projects funded under Horizon Europe and even under preceding funding programs such as Horizon 2020. So to get to the Cordis Project Database, the QR code on the right, that will take you there. It's a long web page. You need to scroll down right near to the bottom. Assuming you do that, you'll see these buttons on the right. And the one I've circled in yellow, I clicked on that, see all Horizon Europe projects. So if you do that, they'll take you obviously onto a further web page where you can really do a sort of detailed search, in this case of Horizon Europe projects. The QR code on the left, this will take you, in fact, directly to this sort of page I'm looking at here. Now, if you get to this part, you can do all manner of searches. I did a very simple one. I just stuck in the key term bacteriophages, and it came back with some 22 results. So 22 different projects. Obviously, I couldn't squeeze all of that onto a slide, all those projects. I'm just showing the first two. But it gives you a bit of an idea of the searches you can do. I should add, with this database, you not only can search and say key terms, but you can also, for example, search on specific organizations. I mean, you might be particularly interested in, a certain university or public research organization or company, you know, how many Horizon Europe projects have they been involved in? How active, how successful they are. Equally, you can use the database to search on past funding calls. So we take ASCLEPIUS. ASCLEPIUS is funded, it's a twinning project funded under widening. You can use this database and go and directly find all 100 projects that were funded under the call, the same call that ASCLEPIUS was funded under. But anyway, look at this page here. So I stuck in the word bacteriophages, 22 hits came up. This first one, it says faster in the list. If I wanted to know more, I would click on the hypertext link at the top, and that would take me to a page where I could read an abstract about the project. I would be able to see all the partners involved in the project, including the coordinator. And I would even see what budget they received in the project and when the project is running. So again, if you're, for example, thinking about doing another twinning call in a few years' time, or you're interested in a particular call on the pillar two, it's good to do your homework, investigate what's been done. Also to eliminate the possibility that you're preparing a proposal on a specific topic that's already been dealt with. Yeah. Moving on. EU project charter. So look, I talked a lot about this in module one, so I'm going to kind of not dwell on it too long here, other than say in this initiation phase, it's a good idea to put down on one or two sheets of A4 a sort of summary of what your initial project idea is. In the slides I did a month ago, I did a case study sort of focused on bacteriophages. This one here, I apologize again, it's one sort of physics quantum sensing related, but you get the general gist. With that said, with writing a project charter, project abstract, if you find it's kind of difficult to prepare one, these are some practical things that you can perhaps do. So, and this is the sort of thing that I would do myself. So I'll be honest, I often find it difficult to get started with writing a proposal, with creating an abstract. So what I would normally do is I print out the key pages from the work program. I would highlight key terms and phrases. I keep the tables accessible on my desk for easy reference and review. And also, so it's really top of my awareness. I'm reminded that I'm dealing with this call. I might extract important text sections. So I said earlier on in the call conditions, it mentions things like expected outcome and scope. The way that for me personally, I find them presented often in the work programs, I often find them difficult to read because it's just such large paragraphs of text and somehow I get lost with them. So what I often do is I will copy the text from the PDF, I'll stick it into a Word document, and then I'll deliberately break these paragraphs up into separate sentences. I might even create a table with two columns, put the various sentences from the call text in the one on the left, and then the column on the right is kind of a checkbox. As I'm preparing my charter, my proposal, I'll be sort of ticking off, making sure, yeah, did I address that? Do I feel like, dealt with that point? Point number three here, share the call text. So I would distribute the relevant pages of the call text to experienced colleagues and potential consortium partners, get them interested, get them involved. I'd organize some kind of brainstorming and sketching of ideas. So you begin outlining your project idea on paper, or perhaps visualize your thoughts using thought bubbles on a whiteboard or PowerPoint, whichever means of creativity that kind of works for you. Yeah, I wrote here, engage key partners, so arrange an online meeting with the core consortium partners to review the call text and discuss the initial project concepts, and draft an initial version, write a first draft of your project charter. I mean, these are all just sort of practical things to try to get you motivated, get things moving towards the preparation of the proposal. Now, with all this slide, the next one, it's about building a consortium. So, of course, with pretty much all these Horizon Europe projects, they're implemented by consortium. So what I want to say is some words to help you for you to consider perhaps when you're creating your consortium. So the first thing to do, and I'm reading the bullet points on the slide, check carefully the call text to identify the minimum consortium requirements. E.g., it's usually at least 3 independent legal entities from 3 different member states or associated countries are required. Certainly this was the condition for ASCLEPIUS, for the twinning call. So we had to have at least 3 different universities or public research organizations from 3 different member states. That was one of the minimum requirement. But look, these are minimum requirements. If you're dealing, and I'm reading the next bullet point, if you're dealing with research and innovation actions, which quite often have an EU contribution of 3 to 6 million euros, there your consortium can easily be 5 to 10 partners, quite possibly even more. It starts to get rather a lot of partners, yeah? Now, in the initiation phase, you're not going to have like your full consortium like that, click your thumbs, you've got 10 partners. No, of course not. What you need to do is identify an initial critical mass of partners. So say about 5 or more partners, and from amongst those, identify who will be the proposal coordinator and who will be the lead proposal writer. Put in brackets, not necessarily the same person. Usually the coordinator is the proposal writer, but certainly for research and innovation actions, but it's not always the case. For reasons of pragmatism, sometimes you can have a situation where the organization that's doing the proposal writing, they've just got so many projects, they fear that they'll be criticized if they're again the coordinator. And so they appoint some other organization within the consortium to do it. That could be a situation. I've certainly seen situations where the consortium felt that the project would look best if, say, a company was coordinating it, or a large public research organizations that had a stronger reputation, if you like, yeah, stronger credibility. Whatever. Assuming you've got this critical mass, organize a meeting with them to structure the proposal, ideally face-to-face with a whiteboard. Well, this is how it was before we had COVID and we were all using online video. These days, of course, we're doing everything online. So if that's the case, make sure during these sort of initial discussions, you've got somebody who's good at editing a document that will be shared. It might be Microsoft PowerPoint or something equivalent. Yeah. Still think about building a consortium. Here I've got 2 example figures from proposals that I've done in the past. And I give them as examples to sort of illustrate different points. So the one on the left, it was a project, it was a research and innovation action I had probably about 7 or 8 years ago. It was funded under Horizon 2020. It was all about developing organic light emitting diodes for microdisplays. It was a 4 million euro project. We got funded. It ran for 3 years. It had a consortium of about 5 to 6 partners. Now, to try to convey, you can write, of course, text in your proposal to say, look, this is our consortium, but sometimes it's nice to have figures. They convey things more effectively, more easy for an evaluator to understand. So in the case of this particular project, which was called Hyper OLED, we wanted to show that with our consortium, we covered what we call the value chain for this technology. We had partners going right from the development of OLED materials to OLED stacks to OLED displays. So that was a sort of figure that we used there. On the right-hand side, this is another example. This is a project that was called FIT for NNP. It was a coordination support action. My company and myself were the actual coordinator. This was a very different project. It was all about trying to support increased participation from organizations in Central and Eastern Europe, in Horizon Europe, in the fields of nanoscience, nanotechnology. Now, when I put this consortium together, I deliberately got in contact with national contact points, NCPs. from Central and Eastern Europe. Included those in the consortia, and I wanted, given the nature of the call, which sort of said target these countries, I wanted again to kind of convey to the evaluator, look, we've got a good geographical representation across our consortium for this region of Europe. Oh, and by the way, look, these organizations, they're NCPs, many of them. So that was something that I had in that proposal. Okay, that's enough words about the initiation phase. Let's move on to talk about the planning phase. So look, the planning phase, as I said right at the start, and I've mentioned this yellow star on the left, this is really, really concerned with the actual writing of the proposal. So I'm going to be talking at length about actual proposal writing. So if you're going to be planning, writing the proposal, you need to make sure you've got the right application forms. And that's what I'm showing here with this slide. So on this slide, you'll see two documents, or the covers from two documents. There's the one on the left. It says Horizon Europe Programme Standard Application Form, in brackets, HE. HE is short for Horizon Europe. RIA, that's these research and innovation actions, comma, IA, innovation actions. This document, which can be accessed through the QR code in the top left-hand corner, this contains all the relevant forms, explains the different forms if you were making a proposal, an application to either an RIA or IA. And you'll see also on the front of this document, it says application in brackets part A, project proposal dash technical description part B. Now, if you are applying for an RIA or IA, so for example, there's that very interesting call about phages that's coming up later this year that I know Eliaber is interested in. I believe it's an RIA. Make sure you download this document. Make sure you download the latest version, okay? At least a few weeks ago when I looked, the latest version was version 8.0, dated 4th of April 2024. But I'd say beware. I can well imagine in the next month or two, there'll be an updated version. Certainly, what you need to be careful of is, if you're involved in writing Horizon Europe proposals from one year to the next, it's very easy and it's rather dangerous to sort of end up grabbing the old application form from 1 or 2 years ago. If you do that, there's a risk that you suddenly got one that's out of date and you're missing some important new subsection or part of the application form. Okay, right, look, that's enough about the standard application form on the left. The one on the right, in the middle, it says standard application form, brackets, HE, Horizon Europe, CSA, coordination support actions. So this is obviously the one, if it was a situation today that we were trying to write a twinning proposal, this is the thing we would need to download. And the QR code in the top right-hand corner, this will take you directly to the PDF file where you can download that. So we have these standard application forms, and we saw from those covers, it talked about a part A and a part B. And in this slide, I'm going to say a few words, initial words about those. So starting from the top, part A, administrative information. So this is generated by the European Commission's IT system. So the part A of your application, it's created through the European Commission's funding and tenders portal submission system, and it's based on data that's entered by the participants. So the sort of content, the data that gets put in, it includes the following. It'll be general information about the proposal, such as the title, acronym, abstract, and duration. There'll be details about the participating organizations, including their legal names, contact information, and roles within the project. There'll be what are called declarations and ethical considerations, including compliance with eligibility criteria and ethical standards. And I should say, especially healthcare related projects such as what ASCLEPIUS is involved in, there'll be absolutely certain ethical considerations that you'll need to carefully check and tick the relevant boxes in that section. Then also in this part A, very importantly, there's budgetary information, and I highlight that in bold. This is where you outline the estimated costs and requested EU contributions for each partner and for the whole project. Looking at this yellow star that I got on the right, I said, aside from budgetary info, I will focus on the part B. So yeah, look, it's relatively straightforward, the part A, certainly in comparison to the part B. So I beyond, except for talking about budgeting later on in slides on resource allocation, that's kind of it for part A. Part B, on the other hand, the technical description. So this is the narrative component of your proposal. The part B is a detailed narrative that addresses the core aspects of the proposal, structured to align with evaluation criteria. Applicants must upload their part B. So you write your part B, say, in a Word document. When it's all ready, you create a PDF file and you upload that to the EC's funding and tenders portal. Within this part B, there are these three sections. There's a section 1, excellence, section 2, impact, section 3, implementation. And that is what, in a moment, I'm going to be talking about those. But in this next slide, this rather overwhelming slide with lots of stars and color. What I want to do with this slide and the next one is to explain to you how I feel the part B, the technical proposal, should be sort of structured on a high level. I want to explain how I think there should be a relationship between the section 1, the excellence, and the section 3, implementation. So looking at the figure, hopefully you'll identify that there's these two sort of columns. There's a column on the left with these sort of pinkish reddish blocks. That one at the top says excellence. Below that it says 1.1 objectives. And then there's this second column with these sort of blue blocks where the one at the top says 3, implementation. Okay, let's move to the excellence column. So below excellence, 1.1 objectives. This is a subsection of your part B proposal called objectives. This is where you, if you're doing a research innovation action or even coordination support action, you need to outline what are the main objectives for your project, your proposal. Now, what I like to do and what I stress to partners in consortia is, for every scientific and technological objective that you identify, make sure that that maps to its own work package, and do it in such a way that whatever scientific and technological objective 1, that will map to work package 1. Similarly, whatever scientific and technological objective 2, make sure that maps to work package 2, and so on and so forth. Now, this is the, if you like, the structure that I really encourage, I beat on about with consortia. I do this because it makes reading a proposal for an evaluator easier. The structure of a proposal is a lot easier to read. too often, if I don't sort of emphasize this or the consortium doesn't do it, too often what happens is, if you look in the second column, implementation at the bottom, there's this work package 5 and work package 6. So work package 6 is project management. Very often, the consortium will put the project management as work package 1. But if you do that, it screws up the whole numbering system. Yeah, it makes it kind of like spaghetti, trying to see the relationship between objectives and work packages. Okay, look, this is sort of structure I think I want partners to get to. However, it doesn't usually just happen by itself. So now let's look at the yellow stars that are sort of going around the outskirts of this slide. We start with 1, which is sort of in the top right. So when I'm sort of in the initiation phase with a consortium, you have these discussions online or in person with a critical mass of consortium partners. And usually the way the discussions go, different partners say about different things that they can do. You know, they show, you know, we have expertise in this area, you have expertise in that area, you've got labs that can do this. In essence, and that's great having those discussions, and it's essential. In essence, what the partners are talking about are work packages, groups of activity, groups of tasks. That's great. That's the sort of often the starting point. If you're having those discussions, capture those work packages, those groups of tasks. Naturally, a partner will come. It'll become evident that a partner is the right person, the right organization to be a leader for that work package. That's great. Do those discussions, identify these work packages, have the work packages going in a roughly chronological order as much as possible. Then say to each of those work package leaders, look, I'm not only going to need you to write the work package description, that details these tasks, I also want you to write half to 1 page of a scientific and technological objective. Okay, and by doing that, that's how you go through this process. You'll end up with this high level, nice mapping, nice structure. Now, if that still sounds a little bit abstract, what I've been saying, here's a concrete example. This is an example from a project or proposal I had. It was again in this field of sort of organic light emitting diodes. So on the right, the blue box is the blue column. These are the work packages that we ultimately had. And on the left, excellence. These are the different scientific and technological objectives. And so I got, you know, work package 1 leader. That person wrote objective 1, work package 2 synthesis, objective 2, and so on and so forth. And in fact, I don't show it on a slide here, but if you were to look at the ASCLEPIUS proposal, there's a, well, ASCLEPIUS is a bit special because we had to split work packages, but if we hadn't had to split for the lump sum, we would have ended up something rather like this. Okay, moving on now, let's start to talk about these different sections. Section 1, starting with section 1, scientific excellence. So, as I already said in earlier slides, whoever's the work package leader for work package 1, she or he should write scientific and technological objective 1. Depending on the page constraints for the proposal, I usually say to the work package leader that please give me half a page to 1 page for this description of the scientific and technological objective. In that description, I want you to very concisely explain what is the state of the art relevant to that objective. Ideally, explain how your organization is in relation to that. You know, presumably you've got research papers, make sure you reference those. And then also in this objective you're writing about, please explain how, in the context of our project, this new project we're trying to get here, how we either at least at the state of the art, or better still, we're trying to go beyond the state of the art. So if you can get each of your work package leaders to do that, you'll have a very, very nice looking section 1.1. Also, in this section 1.1, so I'm reading the sentence near the top where it says, section 1.1, objectives and ambition. And then it's italicized, briefly describe the objectives of your proposed work. Why are they pertinent to the work program topic? So this bit of text in italicized, this has come straight from the standard application form. The standard application form explains what you're meant to write about in the different subsections. I'm not going to try and explain for each of these bits of text, each of these requirements, what you need to do, but the key ones. So, okay, imagine what I see often with proposals, RIAs, IAs, CSAs, in order to sort of address this particular requirement, the classic thing to do is to create a table. And you see an example here on this slide. This was an example from a project I had a few years ago. It was called CIFIS Home. So what they did, and what you Horizon Europe proposal writers frequently do, is create the table with two columns. In the left-hand column, they'll copy and paste key sentences from the call text. And then in the right-hand column, they'll try to concisely say, look, this is how, with our proposal, we're trying to address that. The good thing, the reason why it's pretty good to do a table like this is it's easier for an evaluator to read. Another reason sometimes why it's good is because with these proposals, there's normally constraints on not only the number of pages, but on the size of font that you can use. And often it's a struggle to fit all the information into the 20 pages or 30-page limit, whatever it is. But if you use from time to time tables, what I've found is you can get away with using smaller font sizes. I mean, you shouldn't go berserk doing it in the whole proposal, but here and there, it seems to be a way to get around a little bit that constraint. Also in section 1.1, the standard application form says, look, describe how your project goes beyond the state of the art and the extent the proposed work is ambitious. Now, a moment ago, I was telling you the sort of instructions I give to the work package leaders, so when they write about scientific and technological objectives. That's really important to do. It's important that you convey in a qualitative manner that you're going beyond the state of the art. Another important way, of course, is through some kind of quantitative indicators, some key performance indicators. Here's an example. This is, you see this table. This was a proposal I did a few years ago called Nemosina. It was a research and innovation action. We had about a budget about 4.5 million. It was in an area of technology called computation in memory. Now, in their case, the principal investigator, the main scientist, he was able to summarize the main objectives for the project in these quantitative indicators, these key performance indicators. So he had, and this is when I'm reading the table, he said, look, we aim to improve the energy delay products by a factor of 100-fold to 1,000-fold, improve the computational efficiency by a factor of 10-fold to 100-fold, improve the performance density by a factor of 10-fold to 100-fold. This is obviously very specific to computation in memory. But whether you're writing a proposal about computation in memory, or organic light emitting diodes, or bacteriophages, I'm pretty sure it's possible to come up with some kind of table where you give some kind of numbers that you're aiming for. And I'd say it's essential that you have some kind of table like that in section 1.1. It again helps to demonstrate the ambition that you have with your project. Still on section 1.1, the standard application form asks us to describe where the proposed work is positioned in terms of R&I, in other words, research and innovation maturity. So you remember a few slides back, I was talking about technology readiness levels, TRLs. Okay, this is a way, this table you see on the right, this is the way you can go about addressing this requirement for the standard application form. So the table that you see, this was the table, in fact, that I'd had for that Nemosina proposal about computation in memory. What we did there was create this table. In the call text, it said, oh, it was rather exceptional. The call text said, oh, we just expect during the course of the project that you go from TRL level 2 to TRL level 3. This is unusual. Usually you're expected to go a bit further, get into technology readiness level 4. Anyway, regardless, we create the table. I highlighted in light yellow the TRL levels to be covered during the project. And I challenged the main scientist, the principal investigator. I said, look, you say you're going to, at the start of the project, you'll go through TRL level 2. How will you verify that? How will you be able to demonstrate it? I need at least 2, perhaps 3 bullet points where you say very concisely, very concretely how that will be verified. So he went away and did that. And I said, well, look, you're going to have to do the same thing again now for TRL level 3. But here's the thing. We didn't stop there. I pushed him further. I said, look, I know our project will be 3 years. I know we're just going to cover TRL levels 2 and 3. But I want to show to the evaluators, we got a bigger picture here. There's a bigger plan. We don't want to just stop at the end of the project. You've got ideas about how to further develop this technology. So I challenged the principal investigator and said, look, keep going, do the same for TRL level 4, 5, 6, all the way up to 9. And then we'll indicate a rough timing for those TRL levels. It's not shown in this table, but in subsequent proposals, more recent ones, I'm also challenging the partners to think a bit about where they could get funding for future TRL levels. So if you're doing a proposal later this year on RIA, research and innovation on phages, think seriously about creating this kind of table. Don't only limit the description to what's going on in the project, challenge yourselves to also cover TRL levels beyond. And I think if you do that, it's a way to show that you have a vision for your project, yeah. Still, oh no, we're finally moving on to another subsection, section 1.2, methodology. So the standard application form says describe and explain the overall methodology, including the concepts, models, and assumptions that underpin your work. This text and figure that you see in the remainder of the slides, this was from one of these projects I had on OLEDs, organic light emitting diodes. From the discussions, the consortium had identified the different work packages. We did this value chain. You might recall I showed you a value chain figure showing the consortium. I took it upon myself. In the past, I've done product development, not for OLEDs, but for things like MRI body scanners and automotive components. I've worked in those fields in the past. We also, in those industries, talked about different phases of projects. So I just, with this particular project here, Phoebe, about OLEDs, I took it upon myself. I said, well, look, I see we've roughly got these different phases of developing the modeling, synthesis, characterization, components, lighting. Okay, I'm going to create a figure, put the work package in there. I recognize that work packages 1 to 3, there's some kind of iteration there. I'll put this all in a nice figure and I'll say, this is our methodology. We're kind of following a technology development process. Maybe in the case, almost certainly, I'm sure, with phages, you've got some kind of development process that you follow. If you create a kind of figure and somehow relate your work packages to the different phases of that development, and you put that figure in there, and then maybe write some words to elaborate a bit on the work packages, that's a very nice thing to write for the section on methodology. That usually goes down pretty well. Also in section 1.2 methodology, the standard application form says describe any national or international research and innovation activities whose results will feed into the project and how that link will be established. Now look, this table that you see here, this was from a proposal I did called Mari Sabira. It was a funding, it's a funding thing called ERA Chair. This is a funding call under the Widening Program. We got it under Horizon Europe. It also existed in the previous framework program, Horizon 2020. In short, these ERA chairs, they're nice, interesting calls. They give up to about €2.5 million for a 5-year project where basically allows the university or public research institute to hire a top professor in some new, exciting, innovative field of science and research. And it allows that professor, the ERA chair, allows her or him to have to hire a small research team, some postdoctoral researchers. So the table here was an ERA chair proposal. I did it with Tallinn University of Technology, TalTech for short. They wanted, and in fact they ended up getting an ERA chair in the field of maritime cybersecurity. When I spoke to them, when they called me in to help them write the proposal, there were lots of obvious reasons why they could write a strong proposal, amongst which was they had a lot of, at the university, they had this Estonian Maritime Academy, and then separately, they got a very strong department of cybersecurity. Up until that point, they never really worked together, but they'd had each organization, each department was very strong in its area, and they listed the projects that they'd had. So in the table, I said, great, okay, give me these names, these projects, give me the website link. So in the first column where it says initiative project, echo to whatever, those are hypertext links. If you clicked on those, it will take you to the particular website where they were mentioned. I said when those projects were running, and then I say very briefly, look, why is this project, this initiative relevant to this ERA chair application? This is an example, of course, for ERA chair, but look, you can think if you're doing your research and innovation action proposal later this year in November, across the consortium, there'll be numerous projects, initiatives they're involved in. It's really good if you come up with some kind of table where you concisely demonstrate, look, you win this new project, how it's going to link up and leverage all these other activities that have been recently going on. That looks really good in a proposal. Also, lastly, in this section 1.2 methodology, it says explain how expertise and methods from different disciplines will be brought together and integrated in pursuit of your objectives. Of course, you can write text to explain this, but as I said before, it's always quite nice to have figures and tables. It helps break up the proposal, makes it a bit more easier. These are some examples. The one on the left, this is something we did simply with one of these OLED related proposals. The one on the right, this is one we did for this Mnemosina computation in memory. So we did these simple figures. And then it's not shown on the slide, but we wrote concisely a bit of text to explain the different groups, different disciplines that were there. Okay, I'm looking a bit at the time. So Natia, I would say I've done a good hour, and you're probably all bored senseless.
Okay.
Let's have a break, if you don't mind, for a quarter of an hour. It's sort of quarter past the hour right now. Let's come back at 1/2 past, and then I push through and
So,
do the rest of the slides on the sort of planning phase.
okay, so 15 minutes break and we come back.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
thank
So
you.
see you all in a little bit, yeah?
See you.
Hey, Natia. So, I hope you had a chance to have a coffee, some caffeine. We all need it.
I need it.
Uh, so look, I'll let me just put my presentation on display. Okay, Natia, if it's okay with you, I'll keep pushing on through. So
Mhm.
still, we're still in this sort of section about the planning phase, and before we took a break, I was talking about the part B, the technical proposal. I'd mentioned that it's these three sections in the part B. There's excellence, uh, section 2, impact, section 3, implementation. I'd spoken prior to the break about excellence. Now, in this second part of the presentation, I'm going to talk about the other section. So starting with section 2, impact. So within section 2, impacts, there's a 2.1, a 2.2, and even a 2.3. If we consider section 2.1, the standard application form says that the title of this is Project Pathways Towards Impacts, and you're asked to describe the unique contribution of project results towards 1, the topic outcomes, and 2, wider impacts. So how can you go about addressing this? Look, I think the message I'm trying to get across here, this figure, this bit of text, this was from this Mnemosina project proposal I had a number of years ago. In that particular call, buried in the call text under expected outcomes, it said, and this way you can just about see it says 2.1.2, helping to double economic value of semiconductor component production in Europe within 10 years. That was one of the expected outcomes from that Mnemosina project. I was fortunate in that consortium, we had some very strong partners, including industrial partners. There was a company called ARM, based in Cambridge, UK. They're famous for designing chips, computer chips that are used by Apple and all sorts of different electronics companies. That partner arm, they had access to a whole load of different marketing information, marketing documents, and I asked for them to send me some copies, and that was I drew upon that information to sort of write some text to convey that, look, this field of semiconductor production, this field of computation in memory that we're going to be working on, there's lots of information, there's lots of studies that suggest that this is going to be a big growth area in the future. Of course, this is only very specific to computation in memory. Also, when I wrote that proposal 6, 7 years ago or more, we didn't have generative AI. We didn't have things like ChatGPT. If I was writing this proposal again, say today, I wouldn't necessarily need to go into the marketing literature. I mean, of course, it's good if you do, but if you use ChatGPT, if you pay for a subscription, incidentally, you can pay for just like on a monthly to use it for 1 month. It's like $20 per month. You can choose to subscribe just for say 1 or 2 months whilst you're writing a proposal. Through the subscription, you can access their more advanced models like 4.0 and 4.5. The 4.5 is particularly good for doing research, getting very detailed information. I'm saying all this because, of course, generative AI, ChatGPT, it can really help you with writing certain parts of text for the impact section. You can ask. With generative AI, it's all about asking the right questions, asking the right prompts. An obvious thing to do is to say something like, oh, I've got a project in this field, bacteriophages. Please give me 500 words or how many hundreds of words saying how this project could address and create impacts for EU policies in healthcare. Whatever, you can see what it comes up with, further refine your prompts, ask it to give references, embed references to papers, whatever. Through this means you can come up with some very, very compelling text to go in section 2.1. Next slide. But also look in this section 2.1. The standard application form says things like, and it's written in italicized here, indicate the scale and significance of the project's contribution to expected incomes and impacts. So a moment ago, I labored the point about how to write text and use ChatGPT or another generative AI. It's not only good if you can describe these impacts in qualitative terms, but it's also very important to have quantitative measures. Now, this table, this was from one of the original twinning. In fact, the original twinning proposal and project that I won under Horizon Europe. So going back to, it was about 2021, I think was the call. There was a specific version of the twinning call aimed at Western Balkan countries. Buried in the call text, there was a section about expected outcomes. You see that in this table I've got here in the left-hand column. I basically copied and pasted the text from the call. And then I came up with these, in this third column, these series of indicators. That twinning project is still running at the University of Tirana in Albania. It's all about the development of nanosensors for detecting different types of water pollutants. Because it's a capacity building project, I not only talked about indicators, sort of scientific ones, but I also talked about indicators for research papers. In fact, if you look at this list of indicators, you'll probably recognize, certainly in Natia, those of you perhaps seen the grant agreement for ASCLEPIUS, you'll recognize there's certain ones I tend to use for these types of twinning proposals. Okay, look, that's a table for a coordination support action on twinnings, but you can imagine you're doing a research and innovation action on bacteriophage, research and innovation type proposal on bacteriophages. Think also in the impact section about some kind of quantitative indicators, yeah? It's important. Also in this section 2.1, the standard application form requires you to describe any requirements and potential barriers. I think usually requirements, the scientists, they know what to write about. Sometimes they struggle a bit with what to say about potential barriers. What I'm illustrating here on this slide, these two sort of documents, this goes back to that ERA chair proposal that I did with Tallinn University of Technology and Maritime Cybersecurity. So I was trying, and this is before ChatGPT, generative AI. So in those days, perhaps even still today, the way I would approach it is I would try to find out if there are any European-related strategic research agendas. In this case, it was about maritime and also about cybersecurity. What you find, so the slide sort of gives these very specific examples about cybersecurity, but stepping back for a moment. Even today in Horizon Europe, the European Commission supports and funds these important public-private partnerships in different fields of science and technology. There's one that we know about, antimicrobial resistance, AMR. There's a very important sort of public-private association in that field. Look, whatever the field is, antimicrobial resistance, cybersecurity, whatever, try to identify these public-private partnerships. I think today they're called European partnerships. 10 years ago, they were called European technology platforms. Find them out. Those public-private partnerships, they are very influential in determining the calls that appear in the Horizon Europe work programs. What those partnerships do is they create these strategic research agendas every 3, 4, 5 years. If you can find and download those documents, typically before they spell out what are strategic research priorities, they'll have sections where they talk about the problems, the challenges faced in that sector. Those words, problems, challenges, for me, those are synonyms to barriers. Those are precisely the kind of sources of information that I would extract and use to help write this particular section in the proposal. Now, again, I'm saying all this, when I was doing this, this was before generative AI. Now, no doubt you can use the likes of ChatGPT to help you write this. If you are, maybe make sure when you're writing that prompt for ChatGPT or whatever it is, tell them to sort of say, look, please write me 700 words of text on potential barriers, and please make a specific reference to current European partnerships in the field of relevant to antimicrobial resistance, bacteriophages, whatever it is, yeah. Also under Section 2 impact, you have Section 2.2 measures to maximize impact, dissemination, exploitation, and communication. So these three terms you'll hear time and time again. The Commission is very keen that the results, the awareness of Horizon Europe projects is promoted through dissemination, exploitation, and communication. If you're not sure what each of these terms mean, this slide, this figure here, I've literally copied and pasted it from a European Commission website. It says very concisely it defines very concisely each of these different terms. Now, not only have you got to be aware about dissemination, exploitation, communication in the context of your Horizon Europe proposal, in this section 2.2, you're asked to provide a first version of a plan for dissemination, communication, exploitation. And this table here on the right, on this slide, this is an example. So it's like with so many other sections, subsections, it's good to have a mixture of sort of qualitative description combined with some kind of quantitative indicators. Now this, in the case of this table, this is from a project that I have running currently now under Horizon Europe. It's funded under a scheme called EIC Pathfinder Open. With that scheme, when you write the proposals, there's an extremely short page limit. It's just 20 pages for your Part B. But although there's only 20 pages, you still have to squeeze all this information about Section 1, Section 2, Section 3. So as a consequence, the table that you see here had to be extremely concise, very condensed. Nevertheless, I mean, this is a proposal about something called quantum reservoir computing. It can easily be adapted if you're doing a proposal about phages, yeah. The thing to note, I think the first column where it says project results, that's all pretty generic, could be about any kind of field of science and technology. Similarly, the second column, the thing to note is some of the stuff looks rather generic, but every now and again I write in brackets e.g. and then I give a specific example of a conference or a scientific channel or a specific journal. If you're doing a table like this, make sure obviously that you're referencing conferences and journals that are well known, relevant to your field of science and technology. Then there's this next section, target audiences. The thing to understand here is the Commission's really keen that you are aware of your different audiences and that you are using that you're trying to reach all of them in some shape or form. So that's why you see these 5 different categories of target audience. I don't show it here, but in the actual proposal next to the table, I wrote a few sentences just to elaborate and explain what these different audiences were. So in the case of the industry, I wrote some sentences and I gave some very concrete examples of companies that might be interested in the field of quantum reservoir computing. Then the last column I gave KPIs, key performance indicators. These were targets to be sort of reached by the end of the project. Still in section 2.2, on the left, I've written here, in italics, the standard application form asks you to outline the strategy to manage intellectual property. So intellectual property is things like patents, trademarks, this sort of thing. The table you see here, this is a classic thing I do with all my proposals, even with not only with research and innovation actions, but also with coordination support actions. So when one is talking about intellectual property and patents, there's these 2 terms that are often used by the lawyers. They talk about background knowledge and foreground knowledge. So background knowledge is specific, say, scientific knowledge, expertise that partners have prior to your project. Foreground knowledge, on the other hand, is new knowledge that will be generated during the course of the project, knowledge which is potentially intellectual property. So what I do when I'm writing the proposal, I create a simple table like this. Initially, the table, besides the titles, the columns, everything else is empty. And I ask the partners, especially the work package leaders, I say to them, look, please describe what you anticipate will be the new knowledge, the foreground knowledge that will be generated. At the same time as you do that, please indicate who do you think will be the lead partners, say, concerned in that area, and who might be other partners in the consortium that will claim some kind of ownership rights. Yeah. So in this case, with this project, this was the computation in memory, the Mnemosyne project. The partners decided to do it work package by work package. You don't necessarily have to do it work package by work package, but definitely circulate this amongst the consortium, get it filled out, include it in your proposal. This goes down well with the evaluators. Also, it's very useful because if you win the project, you're going to have to come up with something called a consortium agreement. And this table, this information, in essence, is something you're going to have to include in that consortium agreement. So by doing this sort of work up front, you're preparing yourself already for having such a project. Now, the last section, subsection 2.3 within impact, the standard application form requests you to come up with a canvas showing key elements of the project's impact pathways and measures to maximize its impact. Now, if you would look in that standard application form, there is a sort of table there. They give a kind of very basic example. What I'm showing here on this slide with this table, this in essence is the canvas that I created for the twinning proposals. So this is not the table per se, the canvas that was in ASCLEPIUS, but ASCLEPIUS had something very, very similar. This was the canvas that I came up with for the twinning proposal with ELTE, the university in Budapest in Hungary. Their twinning project is focused on this field of quantum reservoir computing. If you're doing it in the future, a twinning proposal or some other widening type of proposal, you might think to come up with a similar kind of table for this canvas. Try to summarize, try to distill the specific needs that are underpinning your project. So for the twinnings, I talked about SWOT analysis for the specific organization, but then I also, on this sort of specific need on the level of the coordinator, but then I also tried to identify what's the specific need at a sort of European level. Other things to mention, yeah, you don't necessarily have to squeeze everything into these tables. If there's some information that appears elsewhere in the proposal, it's okay to sort of give some references. So if you look in the lower part of the table, in the middle, it says outcomes. All the outcomes had already been defined, described in another section 2.1.2, and it was just impossible to try and squeeze all that information here. So that's okay to do from time to time. Okay, that's enough about impact. We move on to the third section, implementation in the proposal. So in the section 3 implementation, you are required to provide a PERT diagram. A PERT diagram is a diagram which sort of shows the relationships between the different work packages. I think my message to get across here is, I know if you have a project, the reality of the relationships between work packages and the communication flows can be very, very complicated in reality. However, I strongly recommend in your proposal that you really present a sort of simplified version of those relationships between the work packages. So in this example here, this is from my currently running project on quantum reservoir computing called QRC for ESP. With this project, there's a work package 1 dealing with sort of theory and models. This is with any kind of physics, chemistry kind of related project, you usually got some kind of more theory modeling kind of work package, which is supposed to then influence the development of materials or components. In this case, the theory is driving the development of 2 different types of quantum reservoir, a superconducting one and a defect-based one, which in turn, provided they can develop good enough prototypes, they'll end up going into this work package 4 where a demonstrator will be built and some benchmarking. Whatever the field of science and technology, you can often simplify the sort of overall flow, the relationships of the scientific and technological work packages. I strongly recommend that. Then the work package dealing with project management dissemination, you just basically kind of put them on the side above and below those S&T work packages in the middle. In this section subsection 3.1 is where you have to provide the work package descriptions. So the work package descriptions, these are descriptions of the objectives and tasks for each of the different work packages. Here you see on this slide, I've copied and pasted part of a work package description. I haven't given the whole work package description because it was just too big. But what I've put here is enough to sort of help me try to get across the point. Then the points I want to make are the following. For each of these work package descriptions, you have to sort of indicate 1, 2, 3, a number of objectives, scientific and technological objectives, that work package. My strong recommendation is for whatever number of objectives you have, each of them should map to their own task. Indeed, you can get it down to the point where essentially the title, the name of an objective is exactly the same as a task. The other thing to point out is that the title of these objectives and tasks, I've often seen it for non-native English speakers, which is understandable. They often write the titles in quite a sort of passive, abstract, using sort of passive, abstract language. I strongly recommend that with these titles, you use the imperative version of the verb. So this is sort of the version of the verb where it's kind of really an instruction. So if you see these tasks, task 3.1, it says elucidate. Task 3.2, it says determine. I use this form, but it's a sort of subtle thing, but it really emphasizes kind of action, doing things, yeah? And the other thing to note with these work package descriptions is you need to indicate deliverables. And the key point with these deliverables is make sure that they are reasonably well spread across the duration of the work package. It's too easy to just have all the deliverables stacked up at the end of the work package. This is not good. You'll get criticized for it. Make sure that you've got, because I should add, with these projects, you'll have a review by the commission, by external experts, not only at the end of the project, but at some time at an interim in the middle of the project. Whatever the date is for that midpoint, maybe it's after month 18, if you're doing a 3-year, 36-month project, whatever it is, make sure that you've got some important deliverables either at month 18 or shortly before then, so that the evaluators can make a decent assessment of your progress. In section 3.1, you have to provide a work plan timing, what is also commonly called a Gantt chart. This is an example I had in this Hyper OLED project some years ago. I created it using an Excel file. The key thing to mention here is show all your work package titles and the tasks of titles, show who's the work package lead and who's supporting them, show the timings for those different tasks, but also make sure that you clearly indicate the deliverables and the milestones where they fit on the table. I think perhaps my one comment I would say with this particular Gantt chart, this timing, I think we got a bit carried away with the number of deliverables. Possibly we could have got away with a bit fewer, but anyway, it's good for illustrative purposes. Still in 3.1, you're required to describe critical risks and mitigation measures for those critical risks that you might encounter during your project. This is a classic table that I include in the proposals. This is from the this is the table, or part of the table at least, that we have in my currently running projects on quantum reservoir computing. I think the thing to say here is when the proposal is being written and I'm asking the work package leaders to write their work package description and also to write their scientific and technological objective, I also ask each work package leader to come up with at least 2 specific risks relevant to their work package. And I ask them to somehow rate those risks in terms of their likelihood. Is it low, medium, high? And also to rate them in terms of their severity, low, medium, high. Not only do I ask them to come up with these risks, but also to propose some very concrete, specific risk mitigation measures. And all that information eventually all gets put, all the information from the different work package leaders, it all gets put into a table. Still on section 3.1, you're asked to say some words about the efforts. Efforts is the European Commission term for person months. You're asked to write some words about the efforts and about the budget that you have to sort of justify a bit these resources. Now, the classic thing you'll see in Horizon Europe proposals, well-written ones, you'll typically see some sort of figures like this with some sort of pie charts where the distribution of efforts, the distribution of budgets is shown. I'm going to step through each of these pie charts and say a few words. If you start with the first one, efforts distribution, work packages. So this shows the number of person months for each work package and what that represents as a percentage of the total number of person months. Now, in this particular proposal, work package 6 was the work package dealing with project management. The thing you need to know here is that for all of these Horizon Europe proposals, the number of person months allocated to project management should lie somewhere between 5 to 7% of the total number of person months. This range of 5 to 7% it's not written down in the standard application guidelines. You never hear it from the Commission, but it's somehow this is tacit knowledge that we're all supposed to know. And if you write a proposal and you have person months which are below 5% or exceed 7%, you're at real risk of being criticized and getting marked down. So stick to between 5 and 7, 6%, for example, you'll be in a good position, yeah? Work package 5 here on this particular proposal was the one dealing with dissemination, exploitation, and communication. My words of advice here are, if you're doing a research, innovation, and innovation action, allocates somewhere like, I know, 7, 8, 9%, something like that sort of order of person months to this work package. Try to keep below 10%. There will be cases for certain projects, CSA, coordination support actions, perhaps where it needs to exceed 10%. If it does, make sure you write some words to justify why you've gone above 10%. Okay, it'll help to defend yourself. Yeah. Then for the remaining work packages in this figure, work packages 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the scientific and technical ones. Of course, I think the thing here to do is you don't have to have an exact balance, an even distribution of person months across the scientific and technical work packages. Of course not, because certain tasks require more person months than others. Nevertheless, if there are certain scientific and technological work packages which have higher person months, make sure you just write a few words to explain why. Why are they higher? Yeah, that'll help defend yourself. So that's some words about efforts distribution across work packages. The pie chart in the middle, this is efforts distribution across partners. So in this figure, I'm showing like what percentage, what number of person months, what percentage is allocated to academic partners. That's the sort of pink part. And then the blue, it shows the similarly for private partners. The things you need to understand are the following. If you're doing a research and innovation action, in other words, with relatively low TRL levels, technology readiness levels, it's usually acceptable and understood, unless it's written explicitly in the call text. It's usually understood that most of the effort will be done by academic partners, because this is a project which is very much in the research domain. Yeah. On the other hand, if you're doing a proposal for an innovation action, it's much closer to commercialization. There, it's really important that your private partners, your exploiting partners, are seen to have a big share, if not half, at least close to half of the person months. And regardless whether it's an innovation action, research innovation action, if like with this particular pie chart, it was really a distinct difference. The academic partners had over 80%, the private partners had less than 20%. Make sure you just write 1 or 2 concise sentences saying why makes sense, why this is okay. Then the last pie chart, budget distribution. This shows the budget across the different categories, personnel, travel, so on and so forth. I think the thing to perhaps bear in mind here is if your travel budget, say, exceeds maybe about 10% of the overall budget, which is the case with Asclepius because it's a twinning project, make sure you write some words to justify, explain why that's the case. Also, it's not shown in this pie chart, but if you do have some subcontracting budget, and make sure that budget is as small as possible, certainly below 5%, and certainly make sure you give some words to explain. Moving on to section 3.2 in section 3. So this is about capacity of participants and consortium as a whole. The rest of the slide is taken up with an example. This was from this Mnemosina proposal that I had on computation in memory, but the table that's shown here, I've also used a very similar one in Asclepius. In essence, with the table, and this comes right at the very, very end of the proposal. So to demonstrate the capacity of the participants consortium, in the table that I create, I copy and paste those scientific and technical objectives that we had and described in section 1.1. That's what you see in the second column here. And then in the third column, I say very concisely, look, this is why, this is how we've got the right work package leader, the right task leader working on that objective. This is how they got the right skill, expertise, laboratory equipment, whatever. Make sure that you, when you're filling this in, that you give some very concrete, specific information about those partners. Yeah. But anyway, if you do this, this table is quite kind of nice because right at the end of the proposal, the evaluator is again being reminded about those scientific technical objectives that you defined in 1.1. So literally at the start of the proposal, at the end of the proposal, you got this focus on these S&T objectives. So look, that's a lot of words, a lot of slides about the part B, about these sections 1, 2, and 3. I want to talk now about the resource allocation, which is about person months and budgets. And I'm going to start off by, well, really focusing some words and some slides about the budget, about the costs. Now, the thing to understand here is, and this is the first bullet point on the slide, it says lump sum funding versus reimbursement of actual costs. So we have to understand with these Horizon Europe budgets is there's two approaches to doing, besides having research and innovation actions and different funding rates, there's also other ways in which you need to be aware of that the budgets are presented. There's this lump sum funding thing, and then there's this thing called reimbursement of actual costs. So how do they differ? Lump sum grants are defined per work package in the grant proposal, and they're fixed in the grant agreement. The funds are triggered upon completion of the activities in work packages. The payment of lump sums follows the usual European Commission payment schedule. In other words, there's pre-financing, typically, but not always interim payment, and certainly there's a final payment. On the other hand, reimbursement grants, these are defined according to eligible costs, in brackets, personnel, travel, equipment, etc. The funds are triggered upon submission of financial statements showing actual costs for period 1, period 2, however many periods you have in your project. The payment reimbursement grants follows the regular EC payment schedule, pre-financing, typically interim, and then final payment. Why am I sort of laboring? I'm going to be saying some more slides about this. What one needs to understand is that before Horizon Europe, in the previous framework program, virtually all the projects were reimbursement grants. It was only at the very, very end of Horizon 2020, so probably about around 2019, 2020, this sort of time, the Commission introduced some pilot calls where they tested out this concept of lump sum grants. It went well. As a consequence, now in Horizon Europe, there's increasingly a move towards lump sum grants. And in fact, ASCLEPIUS is a lump sum grant funded project. However, if you do that research innovation action proposal for phages in November, I don't know for certain, but I could well imagine that it's a reimbursement grant. So have a different approach to doing the budget. Anyway, let me now say some more words about cost categories. So we've got these different models, lump sum, reimbursement, but in fact, either approach, you still have these different cost categories. So under the different cost categories, you have things like personnel costs. The thing to be aware of when you're dealing with personnel costs, in other words, people's salaries, when you're putting a person's salary cost into a budget for these Horizon Europe proposals, it's not only the gross monthly salary that you need to think about. You need to think about also the employer's contributions to social security and pension. So it's like the actual monthly cost to the employer, their overall monthly cost. Most of the time, my experience, those are the sort of salary costs. That's the sort of calculation you have to consider for personnel costs for partners. However, you do also have instances where there's unit costs. So for some beneficiaries, some consulting partners, they use average rates for their staff, and that's something that you will need to use. Also, there are special personnel costs that maybe get used for SME owners. So SME is small to medium-sized enterprise, small private companies. You often have cases with SME owners where they don't pay themselves a monthly salary, but they just take company dividends. If that's the case, for Horizon Europe, the way you calculate a monthly figure for them is there's this calculation from the Commission. You take 5,080 euros and then you multiply it by a country-specific coefficient. These country coefficients, you'd need to do a Google search. Unfortunately, I don't have a QR code. I don't have the document readily to hand, but if you did a Google search, you can download the relevant document. As an example, this country coefficient in the case of Germany is 98.3%. So that would be the figure you'd have to multiply the 5,080 euros. So that's some words about personnel costs. Subcontracting costs. The first thing I would say here is you need to double check to see if a cost in your budget is really a subcontracting cost or simply a regular purchase cost. An example of that is for the reimbursement, if you have a project which is reimbursement of costs, and if you have a partner that has a budget of over 430,000 euros, then they are required to provide an audit certificate, an audit statement on their financial statement. And this needs to be provided by an accounting company. This is not something new. This has been going on for years. But going back to, say, early Horizon 2020 and the framework program before that, these costs of paying an accountant, the Commission required us to declare them as subcontracting costs. At some point during Horizon 2020, and certainly now in Horizon Europe, the Commission has said, no, if you have such accounting costs, don't categorize them as subcontracting, just indicate them as regular purchasing costs. So these things you need to be careful for. Nevertheless, if you do, for whatever reason, you have a project where you do have a subcontracting cost, my advice is try to keep it below 5% of your total costs. if you get anywhere close to 5% or above, make sure you write some text to explain precisely why this subcontracting is necessary for the project. And make sure you do that in this special table 3.1G. Part of it is shown on the slide. Otherwise, other costs, purchase costs. So purchase costs are things like travel and subsistence, equipment, other goods, works and services. It's only, the thing to understand here is if your purchase costs are above 15% of your total personnel costs, then you're going to need to give an itemized breakdown of those costs, and you'll have to put it in this table 3.1H that you see here. On the other hand, if your purchase costs are below this 15%, you don't have that requirement. You don't need to give such a breakdown. Let's imagine, I'm halfway down the slide, it says travel and subsistence. If you have a project where there is a lot of budget allocated to travel and subsistence, for example, these twinning projects, make sure you give a really kind of detailed breakdown of how you calculated that cost. And this is what you sort of see what we ended up with justifying our budget on a twinning proposal. If on the other hand, if you're doing a proposal where it's a research and innovation action or innovation action, it's still necessary to give, say, a breakdown of your travel costs, but maybe you say things like that the estimate is based on 2 physical consortium meetings a year with 3 or 4 experts going, and it's also based on, say, 2 or 3 experts going to conferences to present research results per year, something like this, yeah. If you have equipment in your budget, the key thing to remember here is the cost that you can claim. It's not the cost of the equipment when you buy it brand new, it's the depreciation of the equipment over the course of the project. Especially if you're buying laboratory equipment, you need to be aware of this because often Horizon Europe projects last for 3 or 4 years. On the other hand, the depreciation of the equipment maybe is over 5 or 10 years. Yeah, so yeah. And this thing about the depreciation, you need to follow the accounting standards for your country. So be careful you don't get caught out by this. Other goods that get listed on the purchase costs, there are things like research consumables. My advice here is make sure you kind of, as always, give a breakdown, itemize them. You may also have under this category things like works and services. So the classic one is catering costs for holding consulting meetings, holding workshops. There's this last category. I've got it here on a slide, but to be honest, I personally never encountered it in sort of 15, 20 years of EU funded projects. But there are occasions where you may have a large organization in consortium and they do some kind of internal invoicing for goods and services. So maybe they're a large multinational company and one department is ordering some componentry from another. If that's the case, you need to use table 3.1I. So there's a whole load of words about different cost categories. I need to say now some more words about lump sum funding, which is the case we had with ASCLEPIUS. Now, my advice here is there's a very good European Commission website with a nice webinar about explaining how it works with these lump sum funding. The QR code on the left, that will take you directly there. You can access the training video, training presentations, and then very importantly, there's an Excel budget tool. Now, this Excel budget tool, this is what I'm talking about here on this slide. The QR code will take you directly to where you can download that Excel file. This is a file that's been created by the European Commission and you are required to use and to fill out if you're preparing a proposal which involves lump sum funding. You have to fill in this Excel file. When it's complete, you actually have to sort of upload it to the European Commission's funding and tenders portal. It forms part of your application. Yeah. Now, some are linked with this lump sum funding. As is so often the case with these Horizon Europe projects, the bulk of the funding is going to cover personnel costs. Now, in that context, I'm raising your awareness about something called the Horizon Dashboard for Lump Sum Evaluations. The QR code will take you to the relevant webpage. This is a sort of section webpage that the Commission actually set up for the experts who evaluate lump sum proposals. This webpage, it provides an objective benchmark for personnel costs in Horizon Europe grants to ensure budgets are reasonable. The data that's displayed, it shows funded person months at different costs, broken down by country and organization type with cost distributions between the 20th and 80th percentiles. Be prepared to write a short justification why a partner's personnel costs fall outside these percentiles. Now, that might sound a little bit like gobbledygook what I just said there, but let's look at the screenshot that is on the right side of this this slide. Now, look, if you go to this web page, in simple terms, these web pages, it contains information. The Commission has collected masses of information about the person month rates, the cost rates used by different organizations from different countries. By going to this dashboard, you can find out what are the ranges for a particular type of organization in a different type of country. Here I did an example. I said, oh, well, if I'm dealing with a private company in Luxembourg, what are the person month rates that are used typically based on how many hundreds of past proposals? And this is the information that came back. It said, well, the 20th percentile was 6,000 euros, the 50th percentile median was 6,000 euros, and the 80th percentile, 7,400 euros. Okay, this is all well and good, you might say, but so what? Well, it's important information because if you're doing a proposal and you're preparing a lump sum budget, you need to check for each of your consortium partners their person month rates against these percentiles for their country. If your partner is using a person month rate above or below, say below the 20th percentile or above the 80th percentile, it's not that you have to go back to the partner and say, look, no, sorry, you're too cheap or you're too expensive. No, you don't have to do that. But what you do need to make sure you do is you need to give some justification, some kind of explanation why the rate falls outside these standard ranges. And the place you can do that is in these Excel files, this lump sum Excel file budget tool. There's one of the last sheets is called something like any comments. And that's where you can write some sort of explanation about why such and such a partner is falling outside these ranges. If you do that, you're just making sure to cover yourself that you don't get criticized, yeah? Anyway, if you do all that work, you prepare your Excel file, it gets uploaded to the funding and tenders portal, your lump sum funding budget, it will look something rather like this, typically like this in the proposal. So this table shows the different work packages running at the top, and then it shows the different consortium partners, and it shows the budget they have calculated for each and every different work package. So enough words about lump sum funding. We step back for a moment and talk about reimbursement of actual costs. So here, I'm showing this slide also an example of an Excel file. The thing to understand here is the Commission doesn't provide an Excel file. They don't insist that you use a particular Excel file. They don't require that you upload an Excel file when you make your submission. Nevertheless, of course, in order to calculate a budget for reimbursement, you're almost certainly going to have an Excel file, yeah? Now, my word here is this screenshot shows, say, the one that I typically use when I'm doing research and innovation action proposals or innovation action proposals. I keep it very, very simple. I have one sheet for each partner. And for each partner, if you look, say, towards the left of the screenshot, I basically asked them to come up with an average person month rate for their organization. In this case, it was 6,764 for partner one. And then I asked them to indicate how many person months they need for each work package. Similarly, going across, in this case, fortunately, there was no subcontracting budget, but going on to other direct costs, I asked the partners to put in budgets for travel, equipment, consumables, so on and so forth. If they have significant budget for equipment or consumables, I asked them to maybe adapt the file and give a breakdown, more details. Anyway, I sent out such a file to all the consortium partners. I give them a deadline by which they should send it back. Usually when they send it back, that's not the last word. Most of the time, there needs to be another iteration. I normally need to go through and do a bit of harmonization or redistribution of person months across the work packages, so there's no sort of extreme. For example, the number of person months for project management, I make sure that we don't exceed this, we're not outside this 5 to 7% range. Likewise, work package on dissemination, I might do a bit of massaging there. Often I see travel budgets, partners, some ask for what seem to be far too much, some far too few. I do a bit of juggling there so that there's a greater balance, this kind of thing, yeah? So assuming you've prepared a budget in your own Excel file and you've copied and pasted these numbers into the part A in your proposal in the funding and tenders portal, your budget would look perhaps something like this. So in this case, the budget is sort of shown for the different cost categories: personnel costs, subcontracting, purchase costs, etc. And then it's shown how much for each of the different partners. So this is the budget for my projects on quantum reservoir computing called QRC for ESP. So, right, you know now how to write a part B, you know how to do the part A. What I haven't said is like, well, actually, how do you kind of register for the call? How do you go about submitting for the call? So I've just got 2 slides on this. No surprises here. You need to go to the EU Funding and Tenders portal, which I assume you've already are registered as a user. The QR code on the top left will take you to the relevant page. You look in that menu near the top where it says funding highlighted in orange. You from the drop-down menu, you pick call for proposals. You go and do your necessary investigations so you get to the point where you can see the call that you're interested in. Purely as an example, I've assumed here that we are the coordinator and we're wanting to submit to this call called Teaming for Excellence. So this is a call that's actually currently open. The deadline's on the 10th of April. It's funded under the widening call. The Teaming for Excellence is kind of it's kind of like a twinning project, but on steroids. So it's like 10 times the budget. Arguably, you could say 10 times the headache. But anyway, let's imagine we're going for the teaming for excellence. If that was the case, you would click on the hypertext links listed there. That would take you then through to another web page where there's lots of information about the call. In fact, it's kind of information that you would also see in a work package. It's a long, long page you would have. You would need to scroll all the way down to the bottom until eventually you see a section where it says Start Submission. You're required to press the button Start Submission. That will then start the process for you to register for submitting a proposal. By pressing the Start Submission, you're not actually submitting the proposal right there and then. You're not required to submit normally, within minutes or hours, the whole proposal. No, what we're doing here is we're just starting the submission process. And my recommendation is that as soon as the call is open, and calls usually open several months before the deadline, certainly at least say 2 months or more before the deadline, make sure you've started this submission process. Yeah. When you start and the person who starts the submission process, she or he, ideally in an ideal world, they'll be the project coordinator, or certainly the project a representative from the coordinating organization for the proposal. That's the ideal situation, because when they do the registration, they will need to give what's called the PIC number, the participant identification code for their organization. Now, assuming you've done this initial start for the submission, over how many days or weeks or months you got until the deadline, during that time, you'll need to enter the administrative data for the consulting partners for the Part A, which, as we mentioned earlier on, it includes the things like the title, the abstract for the proposal. You're going to need to complete your Part B. Once it's ready, you create a PDF version of that. That will need to be uploaded. If it's a lump sum funded call, then you'll need to upload this Excel budget tool that the Commission provides. Once you've done all those things, you don't see on this page here, but believe me, you have to take it on trust, but there's an online proposal validation check. There's a button that you can press for that, so you can check that you've got all the necessary information uploaded and included. Assuming the validation check comes back fine, you're then at the point where you can actually submit the proposal. And there's a submit button to be pressed. Now, when you press that button, if there's still some more days until the deadline, you can submit further versions, improved versions of your proposal, yeah? Improved versions of your Part B, yeah? You can do that, you can keep submitting right until the deadline. My recommendation here is, as a sort of insurance policy, it's really good to make sure that you've got a version of your proposal submitted, say, a few days at least before the deadline. Don't leave everything, don't leave your sort of submission, your to the last day and to the last hours, because often with these calls, you'll have literally thousands of different proposals being prepared and submitted. And during those last few hours, this whole funding and tenders portal can almost grind to a halt because there's so many people trying to access it. Anyway, let's assume you've submitted your proposal, some amazing proposal for that research and innovation action in November. What happens next? How's this evaluation process go? Well, you have these stages. There's first of all, there's what's called the admissibility and eligibility check. So the Commission checks that the proposals meet submission rules and eligibility criteria. For example, Did you have the minimum number? Did you meet the minimum requirement for partners in your consortium? Are they from 3 different EU member states or whatever, yeah? Assuming your proposal passes this admissibility and eligibility check, it then gets distributed for expert review. And with the expert review, there'll be independent evaluators, usually 3 of them, sometimes more. And they will go through and assess your proposal on 3 criteria. And the 3 criteria essentially map to the sections of your Part B. So they'll assess for excellence, impact, implementation. They will score each of those sections out of 5. So the overall theoretical maximum score is 15. Each of those scoring criteria has a threshold. You have to check carefully the conditions for your call, but usually it's about 3 out of 5 for each of the criterion and 10 out of 15 for the overall score. That's the minimum threshold to be even eligible for funding. Now, they'll do scoring, your evaluators. For those sections, they'll also write comments. They'll note what were the strengths and weaknesses for each of those different scoring criteria. And that information will be summarized and put into what's called an evaluation summary report. So this evaluation summary report, for every proposal, every consultant submits a proposal, they will receive an evaluation summary report, whether they get funded or not. That summary report will be, say, 2 to 4 pages in length. It will contain the scores, a summary of the evaluator's qualitative comments, strengths and weaknesses. And yeah, now the thing to understand is, even if you've passed all the scoring thresholds, that doesn't mean to say that you will get funded. No, what happens is all those proposals that pass all the thresholds, they get put into a ranking list. The top of the ranking list is the proposal that got the very highest score. At the bottom, it's the last proposal that just managed to pass the scoring threshold. So everything gets put in this ranking list, and then the commission starts saying, well, how much budget we got for this call? Okay, we start from the top, we fund the first project, the second project, we keep going until we run out of budget. Now, sadly, that point where they run out of budget usually comes well before they get to the bottom of the ranking list. I mean, there's no hard and fast number here, but you know, it's not uncommon for calls for research and innovation actions out of all those proposals that pass the scoring thresholds, maybe only a third of those will actually get funded because the budget just runs out well before they get further down the list. So a funding decision, top ranked proposals receive funding offers, yes. Now people often ask me, well, what sort of mark do I need? You know, what do I need to get in order to get funded? Well, the honest answer is it all depends. There's no straight answer. As I just said a moment ago, there's this ranking list. The higher you are on that list, the better your chances. However, with that said, things I have observed over the last 15 to 20 years are the following. In my experience, it's very rare for proposals to be funded with excellent score below 4.5 out of 5. And it's very rare for them to be funded where the overall score is below 13.5 out of 15. Now, I'm talking very general terms here. There are always exceptions, but that's a very general rule what I've seen. What's the timing for this whole process? Well, typically the evaluation summary reports get distributed 4 to 5 months after the call deadline. So it's not you put all this work in, you prepare a proposal. So as soon as the deadline's passed, it's best to just try and forget about it all for at least 3 or 4 months because you won't get the result for at least 4 to 5 months. Now, when you get Well, these evaluation sum reports, they all get sent out at the same time to all the consortium. If you're one of the lucky ones who's really close to the top of the ranking or at the top of the ranking, you've been selected for funding. Within minutes or certainly hours of you getting your evaluation summary report, you'll also get the sort of magic invitation to contract negotiations. You get this magic letter. It's sort of like the Willy Wonka golden ticket. Yeah. That comes within minutes or within hours of you getting your evaluation summary report. If you're one of the lucky ones, yes, you'll be invited to prepare the grant agreement. So you get this official notification. That process, the grant agreement preparation, it takes time. Yeah, it requires providing grant agreement data collection. So beneficiaries need to provide legal, financial, and administrative details. There needs to be budget and work plan finalization. So written in ensure alignment with the evaluated proposal, including any recommended changes. The EC are often quite pedantic on this finalization process, and it can take the coordinator consortium multiple iterations before the description of the action, part A and B, for the grant agreement is finalized. I try and word that in simple language. Those evaluation summary reports that all proposals get, even for proposals that get selected for funding, when you look at that evaluation summary report, there'll be one or two criticisms, some weaknesses pointed out, even for the one selected for funding. What the Commission then does is, during this grant agreement preparation process for the selected projects, they'll say to the coordinator and to the consortia, look, there were those weaknesses in the evaluation summary report. Please go away and make some small improvements in your part B, in your part A, to address the concerns, the weaknesses highlighted by the evaluators. So that's what you need to do here. Now, you'd think that'd be a relatively quick process, but it can be actually really, really tedious. And certainly with ASCLEPIUS, we really, Lord, the Commission gave us a tough time. It took a long time. There was a lot of, it wasn't any comments from the evaluators, but it turned out the Commission also had various concerns, things they want more clarified or whatever. So this process of grant agreement preparation, it often takes months. Yeah, it's not a 100-meter sprint. It's not a race. And it requires often quite a lot of patience and nerves of steel. Also, during the grant agreement process, you need to prepare a consortium agreement. I'll show that in the next slide. Financial and legal validation. The Commission verifies eligibility, financial capacity, and legal status. There's an ethical and security review. If applicable, projects undergo ethics and security assessments. Certainly healthcare ones, there'll be for sure ethics checks. Once you've been through all that, part A, part B is properly aligned, etc., then you'll go for signing of the grant agreement. So there's an electronic signature done by the funding and tenders portal, by the coordinator, and by the Commission. The partners, the junior consulting partners then need to electronically sign to exceed the grant agreement. This whole process can easily take 3 months. Sometimes it takes longer. Consortium agreement. So for all Horizon Europe projects, unless it's a project which has just been done by one partner, like an ERA chair proposal, for all the others, they involve consortia. If that's the case, then you need a consortium agreement. The purpose of the consortium agreement is to define internal collaboration rules, rights, and responsibilities among consortium partners. It's mandatory. I've highlighted here, it's in red, required. The Commission really emphasised that. The key elements in this consortium agreement, there's sections describing the governance structure, the financial management, the intellectual property and data management, liability and conflict resolution, publication dissemination rules, and other sections. Timing-wise, the European Commission demand that the consortium agreement is negotiated and signed by the consortium before the grant agreement is signed. So if the grant agreement is going to be signed within 3 months, it really means you've got to get a move on with a consortium agreement, because it can also be a rather tedious bureaucratic procedure dealing with a large consortium of partners. And my pragmatic tips here are, if you are having to lead the negotiation for consortium agreement, use established templates. There's this one called the DESCAR model. It's the one that's most commonly used. In Horizon Europe, that'll help save time and ensure completeness. The QR code in the bottom right takes you to where you can download that template document. Ensure clarify financial legal responsibilities early to avoid misunderstandings. Ensure all partners actively review and agree on terms before finalization according to deadlines. So if you're the one leading the consortium agreement negotiations, you'll have to send out a first draft to the partners. Make sure where you probably ask them to add certain information. Make sure you give a deadline. Probably only give, say 2 weeks at most. And you have to do follow-up, because otherwise this negotiation process can drag on for months. And look, that's my last slide. Fortunately, my last slide here is about an optional homework. For those of you who perhaps would be interested in receiving a certificate of project management, this homework is very, very practical. It's all about getting, for those of you who do it, it's all about you getting used to using the lump sum funded Excel budget tool. Okay, so this is what we had to use such a file with ASCLEPIUS. For those of you who haven't used this tool before, with this homework, you've got a choice. You can, I want you to use that Excel budget tool to come up with a budget for sort of your own case study, your own theoretical project. Now, if you've got a good idea for a case study, that's great. Go away and say, create a lump sum budget for that. Failing that, if you don't have a particular case study in mind, here's the sort of case study that I would suggest you use to practice using this Excel budget tool. So imagine that you've got a consortium with 5 partners, partner 1, partner 2. These go away and investigate personnel monthly costs for all those different partners. Partner 1, let's assume, is a Georgian public one. Partner 2 is Portuguese public research organization, and so on and so forth. Please choose salaries that fall between the 20th and 80th percentile from the Horizon dashboard. So go back to my slide 51, go and check that dashboard. That'll get you familiar with using that tool and being aware about person month rates. For the total person months, assume partner 1's got 72 months, partner 2 108, so on and so forth. Then assume your work packages are, that there's 5 work packages, that they've got these titles, this kind of distribute. But how you then decide to distribute the person months for each partner, it's entirely up to you. Just remember that I had warned about what percentage of person months should be allocated for dissemination and project management. For each partner, there's some travel costs. Here's some figures I give here. Suggests likewise research consumable costs and equipment costs. If you do this homework, please download the lump sum budget Excel file from the Commission's website, fill it out, save it, email it to me, preferably before the 18th of April. I will then go through it and give detailed feedback on where you've used it correctly, where perhaps you can make further improvements, this kind of thing, yeah? doing this homework will really help you in the future if you're doing proposals for Horizon Europe.